How does a man who spent 2 decades making America laugh wake up to silence where his studio audience used to be? At 57, Jimmy Kimmel stands in a place that feels unbearably heavy, a career suddenly paused, a legacy under the microscope, and a future no one can promise. It isn't a tabloid headline or some neat TV twist. It's the more painful kind of story, one where power, politics, and a single monologue collide, and the fallout lands on real people with real lives. For years, Kimmel has been more than a joke teller. He's been a nightly constant, a familiar voice who could cut through noise with a grin and a sting. And beyond the desk, he's a father who went from punchlines to hospital corridors, holding on while doctors fought for his newborn son's life, a fight that later returned, again and again, and shaped the way he talked about the world. That part matters, because it explains the weight behind his words, and why this moment, this sudden public stop, is not just about ratings or rivalries. It's about what happens when your voice becomes the lightning rod. Tonight's story begins at the exact second the lights went out. Not figuratively, literally. The crew packed up, the marquee went dark, affiliates stepped back, a decision turned into a movement, and a movement turned into a message. Step over the line, and we pull the plug. Whether you think that's accountability or overreach, one thing is certain: the cost is crushing, and what came next for Kimmel would only get harder. But that wasn't the whole story. It happened fast. One morning there was a show on the schedule. By evening there was a hole in the lineup, and an email chain running hot from Burbank to every corner of the affiliate map. The message was clear. The show was suspended, indefinitely. No splashy farewell, no studio tribute, just blank space where a band should have been tuning, and a monologue should have been landing. This wasn't a standard production pause, or a holiday rerun spree. It was the kind of stoppage that tells everyone, crew, writers, bookers, advertisers, that the ground just shifted under their feet. On paper it looks procedural. A network protects itself, affiliates protect theirs, and somewhere in the middle, a late-night host becomes the headline instead of the commentator. Off paper it feels like a gut punch. Shows are families, messy, loud, occasionally chaotic, but bound together by deadlines and live tape times. When the signal cuts, it isn't just one person who loses a stage, it's an entire ecosystem that loses air. The wardrobe department wonders what to prep for next week. Segment producers sit on interviews they chased for months. Young writers stare at blank Google Docs with no guarantee those jokes will ever be heard. That's the kind of heartbreak viewers never see, and it's the part that keeps people up at night. The trigger? A monologue that was more than a quip. Kimmel spoke about the killing that shook conservative circles, and spilled gasoline onto an already burning debate. Some heard him accusing political actors of spinning tragedy for leverage. Others heard cruelty, or at least insensitivity in a moment that demanded care. The words ricocheted from social feeds to boardrooms, and the decision landed with a thud: the show would not air. From there, the story grew teeth. Stations balked, pressure mounted. A top regulator's comments added a chill that cut straight through the newsroom glass. What used to be a freewheeling space for jokes turned into a test case for the limits of speech on corporate airwaves. Outside, the reaction was instant and loud. Protesters lined up with signs about censorship and corporate capitulation, while late-night peers walked a tightrope between humor and solidarity, knowing that today's news cycle can become tomorrow's target. Inside the building, though, no one was laughing. You can replace a time slot, you can fill airtime, but the trust and rhythm that make a show feel alive, once those crack, they're hard to rebuild. That's the heartbreak, not just a career in limbo, but a community's heartbeat stalled by a decision none of them had the power to make. And yet the line between accountability and overreach was about to blur even more. Before we dive deeper, hit subscribe so you don't miss the rest of this story. It started with just a few lines, the kind of sharp-edged monologue Jimmy Kimmel has been known for his entire career. But this time, the words didn't fade into late-night chatter. They exploded into a national flashpoint. On stage, in front of his audience, Kimmel addressed the killing of conservative activist Charlie Kirk. And he didn't do it gently. He accused certain political groups of twisting the tragedy for their own gain, of spinning grief into strategy. Some viewers nodded, hearing a host who wasn't afraid to call out hypocrisy. Others recoiled, saying the comments were cruel and insensitive at a moment when emotions were raw. For late-night comedy, controversy isn't new. Hosts have always tested the edges of what can be said, sometimes finding themselves in hot water, but usually moving past it with a quick apology or a new headline. This time, though, the backlash had a different weight. Social media lit up within minutes. Hashtags calling for boycotts trended. Clips spread faster than the original broadcast, stripped of context and replayed on loop by critics who wanted Kimmel's head on a platter. What had begun as one joke-filled night turned into the kind of political storm that no PR team can contain. And it wasn't just viewers. Inside ABC, executives were fielding calls they never wanted to take. Advertisers worried about being tied to the outrage. Affiliate stations, especially those in more conservative regions, faced pressure from local communities. The words that left Kimmel's mouth on stage now lived in thousands of inboxes, from angry parents to furious politicians to corporate sponsors demanding answers. Suddenly, this wasn't just about a single late-night show. It was about a network's reputation, the fragile ecosystem of advertising, and the fear of becoming the next brand dragged through the mud. For Kimmel, the sting was personal. He's always been outspoken, willing to trade easy laughs for harder truths. But at 57, with decades of experience behind him, he likely knew these comments carried risk. What he couldn't predict was how fast the dominoes would fall, or how far, because what followed wasn't just criticism, it was a coordinated wave of pressure that left ABC with one brutal choice: protect their host or protect the business. And as the network weighed its options, powerful forces outside the studio were already moving in. The outrage didn't stay contained to social feeds or angry emails. Within days, two of the biggest affiliate groups in America, Nexstar and Sinclair, announced they wouldn't carry Jimmy Kimmel Live anymore. That decision alone stripped the show from dozens of markets overnight, a devastating blow for any program that depends on national reach. Suddenly, what had been a late-night staple felt like it was disappearing city by city, station by station. Then came the heavier hand, regulators. The chair of the FCC weighed in publicly, warning that the fallout from Kimmel's words could spark regulatory review. That statement didn't just raise eyebrows in the industry, it sent chills through every boardroom in the building. When a government watchdog hints at stepping in, networks pay attention. Overnight, the controversy shifted from an angry viewer problem to a political problem, and political problems don't go away with a press release. Inside ABC, executives faced a no-win situation: keep Kimmel on air and risk a larger war with affiliates and regulators, suspend him, and ignite a firestorm over censorship and free speech. They chose the second option. One decision, one memo, and a 20-year franchise was effectively unplugged. To the outside world, it might have looked simple: a host went too far and a network took action. But behind closed doors, it was brutal. Contracts with affiliates had to be renegotiated. Ad slots worth millions were pulled back or redirected. Crew members received vague updates that offered little comfort. And Kimmel himself? He was forced into silence, watching as the show he built was dismantled piece by piece, not by ratings collapse or creative decline, but by politics and power. This wasn't just about one man losing airtime. It was about the raw demonstration of how quickly influence can shift in media. One comment triggered stations. Stations triggered advertisers. Advertisers triggered executives, and executives pulled the trigger on the host. A domino effect that shows just how fragile even the biggest names can be. But the people hit hardest weren't just the executives or even Kimmel himself. It was the team behind the curtain, suddenly left in limbo. When the cameras stop rolling, most viewers move on. But for the hundreds of people who keep a late-night show alive, the silence after suspension is deafening. Writers, producers, stagehands, wardrobe stylists, musicians, every single one of them woke up the morning after the suspension with the same question: what now? A late-night program is a machine, one that thrives on momentum. Scripts are drafted in the morning, jokes sharpened in the afternoon, guests prepped in the evening. Once that cycle stops, it's not just inconvenient, it's paralyzing. Staffers who once worked 12-hour days suddenly had nothing to do but refresh their inboxes, waiting for a message that might tell them whether their jobs still existed. Some were told payments would continue for now, but no one could guarantee for how long. Others began whispering about layoffs, wondering whether they should start looking for work elsewhere. And then there was the emotional toll. For 2 decades, this crew had built not just a workplace, but a family. Birthdays celebrated on set, weddings toasted after tapings, kids raised while their parents worked under the bright lights of a Hollywood studio. To see it all unravel in a matter of hours left many feeling betrayed by the network, by politics, and even by the very industry that had always promised them stability. For Kimmel himself, the burden was heavier. He wasn't just a host, he was the leader of this family. Every writer hired, every band member featured, every production assistant trying to climb the ladder, they all looked to him. Now he carried the guilt of seeing them put on hold, knowing his words had triggered the storm. Friends say he's been deeply conflicted, defiant about his right to speak, but crushed by the collateral damage it caused to the people he cares about most. Behind the public headlines of boycotts and suspension was a quieter heartbreak, hundreds of livelihoods caught in the crossfire of a cultural battle no one on the crew signed up for. Their fate depended not on ratings or talent, but on decisions made in corporate offices and political backrooms. And the uncertainty of that limbo was almost worse than an outright cancellation. But as the crew held their breath, the story began to shift into something even bigger, because this wasn't just about one show anymore. It was about the age-old fight between free speech and political pressure. The debate that followed wasn't just about Jimmy Kimmel anymore. It became a national flashpoint over something far bigger. Where does free speech end, and where does corporate or political control begin? On one side, critics accused ABC and its affiliates of censorship. They argued that late night has always been about pushing boundaries, that comedians are supposed to provoke uncomfortable truths, not be punished for them. In their eyes, suspending Kimmel was proof that powerful voices could be silenced if they strayed too far from the approved narrative. On the other side, defenders of the suspension pointed to responsibility. ABC is a corporation with advertisers, shareholders, and viewers spread across the entire political spectrum. They argued that Kimmel's words weren't just edgy, they were reckless, and networks have every right to protect their brand and their bottom line. After all, free speech doesn't mean freedom from consequences, and the fallout from his remarks proved how costly those consequences could be. Caught in the middle was a question every viewer had to wrestle with. Was this about accountability, or was it about control? Was Kimmel disciplined for crossing a line of decency, or was he sacrificed to appease political forces and protect corporate interests? Neither answer feels fully satisfying, which is why the controversy has continued to simmer long after the cameras stopped rolling. The tension wasn't new for Kimmel. For years, he's been one of the most outspoken late-night hosts, often mixing comedy with raw honesty about issues like healthcare and politics. Some praised him for using his platform to speak from the heart, especially when he shared the story of his son's medical struggles. Others blasted him for crossing into activism. But in this case, the stakes were higher than ever, because the fallout wasn't limited to angry tweets. It involved government pressure, lost advertising, and a suspended show. For viewers who tuned in night after night, the fight over free speech versus political pressure turned into something personal. To them, it wasn't just about whether Jimmy Kimmel had gone too far. It was about whether their favorite voices, the ones they trusted for laughter and perspective, could be silenced in an instant. And that question lingers like a shadow over the entire late-night landscape. But beyond the political headlines and philosophical debates, there was still one pressing question: what happens next for Jimmy Kimmel? As the dust settled, one question hung over Hollywood and beyond. What now for Jimmy Kimmel? Suspension is not the same as cancellation, but it carries the same weight of uncertainty. Every day the show stays off the air, the harder it becomes to bring it back with the same energy, the same audience, the same relevance. Late night is a world built on routine. Miss too many nights, and viewers move on. Behind closed doors, industry insiders whispered about possible outcomes. One scenario had Kimmel returning after issuing some kind of carefully crafted apology, designed to cool tensions without betraying his principles. Another theory said Disney, ABC's parent company, might quietly end the show altogether, choosing to cut their losses rather than fight through controversy. There were even rumors about rival platforms waiting in the wings, considering whether Kimmel could reinvent himself on streaming, where the rules are looser and political pressure is weaker. For fans, the idea of him leaving late night feels almost unthinkable. He's been on the air since 2003, becoming one of the last familiar faces still standing in a changing industry. His mix of sharp comedy and genuine vulnerability, especially when he's spoken openly about personal struggles, made him a rare kind of host. To see all of that silenced over a single controversy would feel like an ending no one expected. But the truth is, Kimmel's next move might not be entirely in his hands. He faces pressure from advertisers, network executives, political forces, and even his own crew, who need answers about their future. Every option carries risks: return and risk further backlash, leave and risk fading into irrelevance, or try to start over in a new space that might not carry the same weight. For Kimmel personally, the speculation carries an even heavier burden. At 57, this isn't just about a paycheck or a platform. It's about legacy. How he responds in the coming weeks may define how he's remembered decades from now. Will he be the host who stood his ground and survived, or the one who lost it all in a storm of outrage and politics? And as fans debated his future, many couldn't help but look back on where he came from and what this moment really means for a man who's been a fixture for over 20 years. At 57, Jimmy Kimmel has lived through nearly every stage of show business. He started in radio, hustling through odd jobs, then found his way onto TV as a comic relief sidekick on Win Ben Stein's Money. From there, he carved out a space on The Man Show, before launching Jimmy Kimmel Live in 2003. 2 decades later, he wasn't just another host, he was part of the DNA of late-night television. Through presidential elections, Hollywood scandals, and even global crises, Kimmel's voice was one audiences came to expect. But what makes his story different from other late-night hosts is the way he blurred the line between comedy and raw honesty. The most famous example came when his newborn son Billy was diagnosed with a rare heart defect that required multiple surgeries. Instead of keeping that pain private, Kimmel brought it into the spotlight, using his platform to talk about healthcare and the fragility of life. Millions of viewers who had only known him for his humor suddenly saw him as a father fighting for his child. That kind of vulnerability turned him into more than a comedian, it made him human. Now at 57, that same humanity makes this moment sting even more. After all he's been through, personally and professionally, many expected these years to be steady ones, the part of his career where he could lean into experience and enjoy the respect he'd earned. Instead, he finds himself once again tested by forces beyond his control. Only this time, it's not a health scare or a personal tragedy. It's his entire career, reputation, and legacy on the line. In a way, his age makes the stakes even higher. A younger host might bounce back, find a new show, pivot to a new format. But for Kimmel, the window to reinvent himself is narrower. Every decision now matters more. Does he want to keep fighting for late-night relevance, or does he step away gracefully, knowing the industry is already shifting toward younger, edgier personalities? That's the cruel irony. After decades of proving himself, he faces the possibility of being remembered, not for 20 years of laughter, but for one controversy that pulled the rug out from under him. And yet, for anyone who's followed Kimmel closely, this isn't just about his job. It's about what kind of person he is at his core, a man who has carried heartbreak before, and who might find a way to carry it again. Which brings us to the real weight of this story, what this tragedy means not just for Jimmy Kimmel, but for the world of media and free expression as a whole. Jimmy Kimmel's story right now is more than a late-night headline. It's a case study in what happens when comedy, politics, and power collide, in an age where every word is magnified and every slip becomes a weapon. For viewers, it's tempting to frame this as just another celebrity controversy, but it cuts deeper than that. At 57, Kimmel is standing at a crossroads. He could issue the kind of carefully measured apology that so many before him have used to smooth things over, and maybe his show would return in some form. Or he could refuse, doubling down on his right to speak freely, even if it means closing the curtain on a career that defined late night for over 20 years. Neither choice is easy, and both carry consequences that stretch far beyond his personal life. For his crew, the tragedy is immediate, jobs uncertain, futures unclear, families left to wonder how long their paychecks will last. For the industry, the tragedy is symbolic, a reminder of how fragile even the most established platforms can be in a world where outrage drives decisions. And for Kimmel himself, the tragedy is personal, the knowledge that after decades of loyalty, laughter, and hard work, one moment can overshadow an entire legacy. But here's the deeper truth. This isn't just about Jimmy Kimmel. It's about all of us. It's about what kind of voices we want to hear in public life, and how much space we're willing to give them before pulling the plug. Do we want our entertainers to play it safe, keeping every line bland enough to avoid offense? Or do we still value voices willing to risk saying something uncomfortable, even if it sparks controversy? That's the heartbreaking part. Kimmel's tragedy isn't only that his show has been silenced, or that his crew has been thrown into limbo. It's that the entire situation forces us to confront an uncomfortable reality. In today's world, laughter isn't safe, words aren't safe, and for someone like Kimmel, who's built a career on saying the thing everyone else is afraid to say, that reality may be the hardest truth of all. So maybe the real question isn't whether Jimmy Kimmel returns to television. Maybe it's whether the space for voices like his will survive at all, because if they don't, then this story isn't just his tragedy, it's ours too. And if you found this story as eye-opening as I did, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because there are more untold Hollywood stories just like this one, and you won't want to miss what's coming next.